Welcome to the channel. Hit subscribe and dive into stories that'll stay with you long after the video ends. Let's begin. The eye. Bell above the door gave a tired jingle as he walked in. A thin man with a cane, shoulders bent like a question mark against the cold. Rain clung to his coat in silver threads, and the whole diner seemed to hush when he stepped onto the checkered floor. It was one of those gray afternoons when the world feels half asleep. Outside, the wind pushed at the windows, and the neon open sign flickered with that restless buzz of old wiring. Inside, the smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, and behind the counter, a young waitress named Clara looked up from wiping a table. She'd seen all kinds in the diner: truckers, drifters, the local sheriff who always ordered pie without paying for it. But something about this man was different. Maybe it was his eyes, sharp, restless, the kind that had seen too much. He chose booth 7, always booth 7. It was tucked in the corner near the window, where the light fell soft and the world passed unnoticed. "Tea," he said when she came over. His voice was low, careful. "Hot, with lemon," Clara smiled. Scribbled it down, though she didn't need to. She couldn't remember the last time someone had asked for tea instead of coffee. When she brought it over, he didn't touch it at first. He just stared at the cup, steam curling between his fingers. "Thank you," he said finally, as if the words themselves cost him something to give. Over the next few weeks, he came every day. Same time, same booth, same tea. He'd sit there for hours, sometimes reading an old leather book, sometimes staring out the window at nothing at all. The others in town whispered, said he was a miser, or a runaway, or maybe both. But Clara didn't ask. She just kept bringing the tea, always fresh, always warm. Sometimes he'd talk a little about the weather, or the sound the train made when it left town. And once, only once, he said something that stuck with her. "You can tell a lot about a person," he murmured, "by how they take their tea." She laughed softly. "And what does it say about me?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "That you care more than you should." That night, when she closed up, she found a folded napkin on the table. Inside, a note, just 4 words, "For kindness, not pity," and underneath it, a crisp $100 bill. Clara frowned, glancing toward the empty booth. The bell above the door had stopped ringing long ago. The old man was gone. She thought about returning it, but something in her gut said he'd never take it back. And as the rain began again outside, a strange unease settled over her, the kind that whispers that something bigger has just begun. A week passed. Then 2, no sign of him. Booth 7 sat empty, its surface wiped clean but still carrying the ghost of his presence. Clara tried not to notice, but she did. Every time the bell above the door rang, her heart lifted just a little, only to drop again when it was someone else. Then, one stormy Thursday morning, he returned. His coat was soaked through, his eyes darker than before. He looked tired, more than old, hollowed out. "Tea," he said softly, settling into booth 7. Clara hurried to bring it, noticing the tremor in his hands as he tried to lift the cup. Without thinking, she helped steady it. He smiled faintly. "You're very kind. You look like you've been walking a while," she said gently. He gave a small nod. "A long while." When the tea was gone, he left a small envelope on the table. "Keep it safe," he told her, "until someone asks for it." Then he stood, adjusted his coat, and walked into the rain one last time. That night, Clara opened the envelope. Inside was an old photograph, a young man in uniform beside a woman with bright eyes and a half-smile. On the back, written in faded ink, 1954, the day everything changed. There was also a key, heavy and old-fashioned, and a short note. "If I don't come back, find the house by the lake." Clara's hands trembled. The only lake near town was 2 miles north, a quiet, overgrown place no one visited anymore. She didn't know what made her do it, but the next morning before her shift she drove there. The fog hung low over the water, and the air smelled of damp pine. At the far end of the shore stood a small cabin, its roof sagging under years of neglect. The key fit perfectly. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. Books lined the walls, and on the table sat an untouched cup, as if waiting for him to return. There were letters, too, dozens of them, bundled with string, all addressed to the same name. Eleanor Wade. Clara froze. Wade, like the old man who signed. His diner check says M. Wade. She unfolded one. The handwriting was shaky, but full of a heart. I see you every day in the faces of strangers. If I could go back, I'd tell you the truth before it was too late. A floorboard creaked. The sound snapped her back. Someone was at the door. Clara? The voice was rough, familiar. She turned. The old man stood there, drenched again, rainwater dripping from his hat brim. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. I got your note, she replied. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. He closed the door behind him, leaning heavily on his cane. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry a lifetime, he sat down at the dusty table. She died before I could make it right, he said finally. My Eleanor. 50 years, and I still can't let her go. He opened one of the bundles of letters, spreading them like cards between them. She was my wife. I went away to serve, and when I came back, she was gone. Left me a note. Said she couldn't wait for promises that never came true. Clara listened, her throat tight. And the fortune? She asked softly. He smiled, faintly amused. Fortune's a funny word. Money, yes. But what good's it done me? Built walls instead of bridges. He looked up at her then, eyes shining. You remind me of her, he said, the way you listen. The way you pour tea like it matters. She felt her face flush, unsure what to say. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, weathered box. This, he said, pushing it toward her, was meant for someone kind enough to care. Inside were bank papers, a will, and a photograph of Clara, taken at the diner without her knowing. Her breath caught. Why me? He smiled faintly. Because you're the only one who ever asked if I was all right. Before she could speak, his hand trembled, and the color drained from his face. The cane clattered to the floor. Mr. Wade, she cried, rushing forward, but his eyes had gone still, his last breath slipping out like the quiet end of a storm. The room fell silent, except for the sound of rain on the roof. Clara sat there, frozen, the will still open on the table, his name written in black ink at the bottom. Everything he owned, the house, the land, the savings, was left to her. The tea in the diner, the kindness, the small talk, it had all led here, and now she was the last person who'd ever hear his story. She looked down at the box again. Under the papers was one final note, for the one who stayed. By morning, everyone knew. News travels fast in small towns. Waitress inherits old man's fortune. The headlines. Read, they called her lucky, they called her suspicious. Some even said she must have tricked him. Clara stopped opening the diner for a few days. She stayed at the cabin by the lake, sorting through his letters, his books, his ghosts. Each envelope told more of his life, the years of silence, the guilt of leaving, the loneliness that grew around him like ivy. It wasn't money he'd wanted to pass on. It was peace. Still, the gossip clawed at her. When she finally returned to the diner, the regulars went quiet as she walked in. Someone muttered, "Guess tea pays better than tips." Laughter rippled. Brittle and sharp, she didn't answer. She just tied her apron, filled the coffee pots, and went about her shift, until a man she didn't recognize walked in. Dark suit, clean shoes, briefcase that gleamed. He sat in booth 7. "You're Clara Hayes?" he asked when she came over. "Yes," she said carefully. "I'm Mr. Wade's lawyer." "There's more." He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sentence. "Find Eleanor's grave. Tell her I kept my promise." The lawyer looked up. He had it added to his will last year. Clara felt something shift inside her. Not greed, not fear, something quieter, like a door opening in a house long abandoned. That evening, she drove to the old cemetery beyond town. The sky was violet, the air full of crickets and pine. She found the headstone easily. Eleanor Wade, 1932-1960, and beneath it, a small line carved faintly, beloved even after goodbye. Clara knelt, set a single cup of tea on the grass and whispered, "He remembered The wind stirred, for a heartbeat. It felt like someone was listening, and somewhere far off. A train whistle cut through the dusk, the same sound he'd always paused for at the diner window. As she stood, headlights swept across the graves. A car had stopped on the road. Someone stepped out. A woman, gray hair, steady eyes. "You must be Clara," she said softly. "I'm Eleanor's niece." They sat together by the lake as night settled in. The niece, her name was Margaret, told stories of the man Clara had only known in fragments, of how he'd written letters for decades but never sent them, of how he'd built the cabin for Eleanor after the war, then locked it when she left. He never stopped loving her, Margaret said. He just didn't know how to forgive himself. Clara listened, the cup of tea cooling between her hands. "I think he found peace at the end," she whispered. Margaret nodded. "Because of you." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the lapping water and the hum of crickets. The world felt still, like the story itself had finally exhaled. Days later, Clara reopened the diner. Booth 7 stayed empty, but she kept it spotless, a quiet tribute to the man who'd sat there with his tea and his secrets. Sometimes, travelers would ask about the photograph behind the counter, a picture of Mr. Wade smiling faintly beside Clara, taken by one of the regulars the week before he died. She'd tell them he was a friend, and that sometimes kindness is the only inheritance that matters. But late at night, when the diner went quiet, she'd pour a cup of tea, hot, with lemon, and set it in booth 7, just in case. One evening, months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a single folded page. "You kept your promise. The house is yours. Use it well. And never stop pouring tea for strangers." Signed, M. Wade. To me before the ink was faded, but somehow fresh. As if written yesterday, Clara smiled through tears. She drove to the cabin that night, lit a small fire and brewed 2 cups of tea. One for her, one for the memory of a man who had found redemption not in wealth, but in a moment of human warmth. Outside, the rain began again, soft against the roof, like applause from a quiet heaven. And as the steam rose between the cups, the old man's words came back to her, the first ones he'd ever spoken in that sleepy diner. "You can tell a lot about a person by how they take their tea." She raised her cup, smiling toward the empty chair. "I take mine," she whispered. With kindness, the clock ticked, the rain whispered. And in that small diner by the highway, where strangers still stopped for coffee and comfort, booth 7 never felt empty again. Thanks for watching.